So today we look, continuing on in the Old Testament, into 2 Kings. Have you ever prayed to God looking for an answer? And then you're like, well, God, I was kind of hoping it would work out a little bit different. Kind of was hoping it would, I don't only have to do this. Well, you're not alone. So today we are all Naaman. Well, who is Naaman, you might say? Naaman was a mighty warrior, a powerful commander, a general in the Old Testament. He was a great man, a rich man, answered only to the king. Problem was, he was a commander for an army in the kingdom of Aram, the Arameans that were against Israel. But we find out that the Lord had favor on him and blessed him. But even though he had all the wealth, all the power, he dealt with some sort of disease, skin disease that was just constantly bugging him. And so he's looking a way to get it cured. And so today we're going to find that out. Today as we go through the story, some themes that we will cover will be humility. We just can't seem to get away from that, can we? Humbleness, dealing with issues of our own pride, arrogance. But we're also going to be dealing with issues of obedience, as well as seeing once again where God comes for all people all over the world, even our enemies, even the enemies of Israel. God's love is for all. So let's turn in our Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 5. You'll find that after 1 Kings. And we're going to have a character, one that we've not dealt with much lately, Elisha, the prophet Elisha. So 2 Kings has a lot of really good, neat stories of what Elisha can do in terms of healing, even Elisha that can move within the Spirit here and there. So we're going to deal with chapter 5. We're not going to read all of chapter 5, but the second part of it, his servant Gehazi is, well, we're just going to have to deal with that another time, but it's really a good story about greed and how that gets us into trouble. So the healing of Naaman. Naaman, the commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master. Because of him, by him, the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Arameans on one of their raids had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, "If only my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." He went, taking with him 10 talents of silver. Now, interesting here, 10 talents. 1 talent weighs about 775 pounds. So we have 750 pounds worth of silver that is being taken along with him. 6,000 shekels of gold and 10 sets of garments. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." All right, let's stop there a minute and just kind of break some things down a little bit. So when we hear about Naaman, it's listed in here, a great man, high favor with his king. The Lord, Yahweh, God, had given him victory. He was a mighty warrior, but he also suffered from leprosy. We also see another character in the story, a young girl that was taken captive and serving as a slave or a servant to his wife. So she's the one who says, "Hey, I know a guy, this prophet. He can cure you." So Naaman goes to his king and says, hey, I want to go there. And the king's like, that's a great idea. I want you to be well. I'll send a letter on to the king so that all will be well with you when you meet this prophet. Now, here's our first case on the importance of editing and rereading what you write. Because what is actually in the letter, it says, when this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy. It's not that you, the king, may cure him of the leprosy, it's that the prophet Elisha would cure him. So we have the king who's all of a sudden like, what? How can I cure this guy? That's not my role. And so now he fears that this king is going to come and fight with them. So when Elisha, the man of God, this is whom the girl talked about, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king. Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel. That he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel. This is the beginning of, so that Yahweh would be known, that God would be made aware beyond just the land of Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots. He's a great mighty warrior. He's not just going to stroll up on a donkey. With his chariots and horses and all the entourage. And he halted at the entrance of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. Sounds like a pretty simple task, right? Naaman is looking for a cure. He comes there like, hey, just go in the Jordan 7 times, you're going to be clean. What do you think his reaction was? Yeah, Naaman became angry. And he went away saying, I thought that for me, he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and he would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy. So Naaman, he's probably got a fairly good-sized ego, right? I mean, he's a pretty powerful guy, warrior, shows up to this prophet's house. Now, if you've traveled a far distance to see somebody, and you're bringing the equivalent of today, at least $195,000 in silver, along with all the other shekels and expensive garments, if you travel there, you would expect this person to come out of the house and greet you, wouldn't you? This is where you'd say yes, right? Right? You go to somebody's house, you expect that they would be like, oh, they're here, let me go see you. But what does the prophet do? He just stays in the house and sends out a messenger. Tell him to go wash in the Jordan 7 times. Naaman is very angry. And he went away saying, I thought he would come out. Then he says, are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? Aren't our rivers where I come from better than yours? What I've got's pretty good, better than what you got around here, this little land of Israel. I'm high and mighty. What I have is better than what you, I've done this. I've taken baths. I've been in the river. Nothing's worked. So he turned and went away in a rage. Now my guess is all those around him were probably fairly fearful, right? As he raged on. But thankfully, there was a servant that approached him and said, Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? Right? If he had said, hey, go climb this mountain, find the monk sitting at the very top, find one green leaf in the Sahara Desert, and then you'll be cured. We'll be like, oh, that sounds like that's what's needed to cure me. How much more when all he said to you was, wash and be clean? So interestingly here, he changes his mind, so he went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan. According to the word of the man of God, his flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean. So here we have in the story where there's a young girl Now we have contrasted with the young boy. We have a person that is now arrogant, was conflicted, needed healing. He's now healed. So then he returned to the man of God, Elisha, he and all his company, and he came and stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel." So this is the first time that Elisha and the king meet face to face. And so the king, or Naaman makes a monotheistic claim. I know there is no other God in Israel except this God who can cure. Now, I'm going to read on just a little bit further. So then he says, "Please accept a present from your servant." But he said, "As the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will accept nothing." Elisha knew what God was doing here was that there needs to be a change of heart in Naaman. There needs to be a movement, just like we would see in Ruth, just like we would see in Jonah, where God's love is reaching out to other peoples. So, Naaman says, so he urged him to accept it, but the prophet Elijah refused. Verse 17, then Naaman said, "If not, please let 2 mule loads of earth be given to your servant, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offerings or sacrifice to any god except the Lord." So we've heard of the term idolatry. There's a term called monolatry, where you worship one God without denying the existence of other gods. So Naaman is in a situation where he serves the king who worships this other god, Rimmon, and he knows he's going to have to be with the king when the king goes to worship Rimmon. Okay? And back in the ancient times, they also believed that a deity was physically located, or there was a geographical location of where God was. So now we come into where he will want to take back with him 2 cartloads of dirt. He wants to create a little Israel back in Syria so that God will be there so that he can worship him. There's been a huge change in Naaman. He's gone from arrogant, proud, mighty, demanding, the powerful, I want this, I need this, I have everything better, to there is one God, you are the prophet, that is who I will worship. I will not offer to anything else. In fact, I want to be so pious that I want to make sure I can worship this God back in my homeland. So Naaman said, "If not, please let 2 mule loads of earth be given to your servant," that's himself, "for your servant will no longer offer burnt offerings or sacrifice to any god except the Lord. But may the Lord pardon your servant on one account." So he's going to ask for a favor here because he's nervous, he's scared. There's a thought that if he were to go with his king to worship this other god, Rimmon, that he would be killed, that God would then maybe bring back the leprosy upon him. And he says, "May the Lord pardon your servant on one account. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow down in the house of Rimmon, when I do bow down in the house of Rimmon, may the Lord pardon your servant on this one account." So he's asking, saying, in order for me to live and to do whatever, I have to go in there, but I'm not going to believe it. I'm going to fake it, whatever. Will the Lord give me grace? And Elisha answers, "Go in peace. Go in peace." Back in July, we dealt with an issue of humility on the series, When I Feel Like Walking Away. We read for 1 Peter where it says, "Therefore prepare your minds for action, discipline yourselves, set all of your hope on that grace that Jesus Christ will bring you." The humility, a willingness to stop and learn, and listen and think, am I just looking for what proves the way I believe, or in my beliefs am I willing to look at what is around and what God is saying to me so that I might learn and grow and acknowledge that what I once thought or once knew is no longer. John W. Stott, theologian, says, pride is your greatest enemy, humility is your greatest friend. Pride and arrogance are conspicuous among the rich, the powerful, the successful, the famous, and the celebrities of all sorts, even religious leaders. But it's also alive and well in ordinary people, including each of us. Yet few of us realize how dangerous it is to our souls and how greatly it hinders our intimacy with God and love for others. We pray to God for things that we want in our life, right? Lord, give me peace. Heal me. But then we're a little reluctant to actually do what is required of us. And John Stott continues to write, humility, on the other hand, is often seen as a weakness, and few of us know much about it or pursue it. For the good of our souls, then, we need to gain a clear understanding of pride and humility and how to forsake pride and to embrace humbleness in our walk with God. A lot of times we know what to do, don't we? We just don't do it. Here it's real simple. Naaman says, go into this river and wash 7 times. 7 is a number of completeness. Well, we don't have to look too much further than what we might read in the Bible in terms of how we might have a life of peace. Treat others as you would have others treat you. Mercy, grace, forgiveness. As I have received grace, I extend grace. We know what to do, but we don't do that. Oftentimes, we think we know better. If you've been the parent of a teenager, you'll understand this, right? I don't know, somewhere around that magical age of 12 or 13, 14, they have learned all that life has to give them. When you talk with them, you barely say anything before the quick reply, I know. You do? You know what I was going to say? Yeah, I know, I got it. But let's not just blame the young ones. How many of us are quick to, I know. We can look things up on ourselves, for ourselves online. We think we know better. And in our fear and in our pride, there is a resistance to what God is saying to us through the words of another, through the action of another, through the revealing of another, what God might be trying to show us in our lives. Now, my guess is Naaman did not go from this day forward and become a perfect person. But this is a story of grace. This is a story of forgiveness. This is a story of conversion. It's a story of movement. It's a story of basic elements of water and earth. All these things that are common to us. God did not give Naaman leprosy because he was displeased with him. We know that he was favored, but he had it. And leprosy, again, is kind of a generic term for a variety of skin diseases that would have been prevalent in the Old Testament. But it taught Naaman a valuable lesson that a person could be rich, powerful, successful, and still have bad things happen to them. Naaman had received blessings from God that are meant to be enjoyed, but not to be used for safety and security. He was looking more at the gifts than on who the gifts were from. In his anger and his egotistical objections, he was failing to see what God was trying to do right in front of him. This is all you need to do. We might want to blame him, but I think we come back to that other point where we all have in these issues of pride, like, look at me. I'm important. I did good things. I've worked hard. They were unappreciative. They offended me. They should have known better. All these things, and a lot of that is very true, and there are times where people are truly disrespectful, when people do truly offensive things. But where does our pride move us or blind us in what we are trying to do? couple other things as we look at this. We see that this story provides for us a glimpse into what baptism is. Naaman had washed himself in the river, in the Jordan. We see that in baptism. We see how that happens with the churches and the converts and the people who come to God. There's other areas where the story could take us if we had the time, about the young girl who was captured yet willing to profess her faith in the prophet, in God. We could look again at Naaman, who, because of his power and his money, thought he could buy his way to healing. The same way in Acts chapter 8, when Simon wanted to buy the power of the Holy Spirit after he saw Peter and John lay hands on a person. We can't buy the gifts of God. Another area we could go in the story would be the king. The king who was fearful, the king who only saw his weakness, the king who, even though he was the king of Israel, didn't trust God for deliverance, but was afraid that what was going to happen if this other king attacked him. And then at the very end of the story, which we haven't got into, is Elisha had a helper, a servant, and he was greedy. And after he saw Elisha had turned down all that Naaman had brought to him and was leaving, he ran out there on his own, even though he was not supposed to, and said, oh, hey, yeah, we are supposed to get a couple talents and a couple garments and a couple other things. Just bring those over to me. But Elisha knew that, found out about it, and then the leprosy that Naaman had came upon Gehazi, the servant, because of disobedience. As we see in the story, there's various ways in which we could be tempted to put our faith and trust in other things, in other people. But where do we go? What do we proclaim? When we see something moving in our life the way God is moving, are we willing to stop? To do something that we're not sure? We're willing to walk by faith and not by sight, as it talks about in Corinthians. Are we willing to trust God? In the times when things are tough, are we willing to look and see what is our pride, our lack of humbleness? How is that impacting? How's that impacting the way you are in the world with other people, with your family, with your friends? And then we can see that even this person wanted to make a difference in his life, to continue to worship God, bringing back those loads of dirt to ensure that he could be in relationship with this God for the rest of his life. Amen.